By the time the storm struck Portus, a Roman merchant could lose more in a single hour than a farmer earned in years. One broken hull, one snapped rope, one wave crashing over the deck, and an entire fortune could vanish into black water. But Rome did not live by conquest alone. It lived by trade, by grain, oil, wine, and the men who moved them from harbor to warehouse, from river to marketplace, from province to the hungry capital. In the 2nd century after Christ, when the empire stood near its height, Ostia and Portus were the beating arteries of survival. Before dawn, while the city still slept, Lucius Marcius Felix was already awake. Not a senator, not a general, but a merchant, one of the countless men whose risks sustained Rome. He rose in darkness, offered a quiet prayer to the household gods, shared a simple meal with his wife and child, and stepped into streets already warming with labor. His world was built on contracts, cargo seals, whispered bargains, and the fragile hope that the next ship would reach shore intact. As the sun climbed over Ostia, the harbor shed its silence and became a machine of muscle, noise, and calculation. Barges nudged the quays, ropes tightened, amphorae thudded onto stone, and every seal, every painted mark, every measured weight decided whether a shipment meant profit or ruin. For Lucius, commerce was never as simple as buying and selling. It was negotiation with clerks, patience with scribes, trust in sailors, and suspicion toward every damaged jar or altered tally. Around him moved the many peoples of the empire, dock foremen scarred by labor, Greek brokers fluent in opportunity, North African sailors weathered by salt and distance, boys learning the trade by watching men who could not afford mistakes. At midday, there was only a brief pause for bread, lentils, and watered wine before the work resumed. Because in Rome, delay could be as dangerous as the sea itself. And beyond the heat of the docks, dark clouds were already gathering over the water, promising a reckoning before nightfall. By afternoon, the sky above Portus had turned from gold to iron. What began as routine became urgency. Cargo had to be covered, seals had to be checked again, and every hand on the key moved faster as the wind changed. Lucius knew the sea well enough to fear it. A merchant did not command storms. He merely survived their decisions. As thunder rolled over the harbor, the careful order of the day collapsed into chaos. Sailors fought the rigging, porters dragged goods through rising rain, and amphorae that had crossed half the empire suddenly seemed fragile as eggshells. In that moment, trade was stripped of its elegance. There were no contracts in the wind, no protection in the ledgers, only men, wood, rope, and water. Lucius threw himself into the storm because hesitation meant loss, and loss meant debt, hunger, disgrace. Here, in the screaming dark, survival rested on the shoulders of working men. By the time night closed over the harbor, fortune itself was breaking apart on the decks of Rome's lifeline. When dawn returned to Portus, it did not bring triumph. It revealed the cost. Broken amphorae lay scattered across the quay, seawater pooled in the cracks of the stone, and the harbor that had roared like a beast now breathed in a tired hush. For Lucius, this was the cruelest hour. Not the storm itself, but the counting that followed. Every surviving jar had to be checked, every damaged seal accounted for, every loss explained before clerks, brokers, and creditors who cared little for the mercy of weather. Yet this was the true discipline of Roman trade. A merchant endured not by avoiding disaster, but by mastering its aftermath. So Lucius began again. He rebuilt his tallies, renegotiated his terms, searched the markets for replacement goods, and turned ruin into motion before the day slipped away. Around him, the port awakened once more, indifferent and immense. Men lifted cargo, barges returned to the river, and commerce resumed its endless pulse. In Rome's world, survival belonged to those who could restore order faster than fate could destroy it. By late afternoon, the river carried Lucius back toward Rome, along the muddy artery that fed the greatest city on earth. The storm had passed, but its shadow remained in every calculation, every sealed jar, every cautious bargain made beneath fading light. On the waterfront, warehouses rose like fortresses of necessity, swallowing oil, grain, and wine before the capital could consume them. Here, trade became something larger than profit. It was order against hunger, movement against scarcity, discipline against collapse. Yet when the ledgers were closed and the lamps were lit, Lucius returned not to glory, but to the small world that gave meaning to risk. In the quiet of his home, beside his wife and child, the noise of the harbor seemed far away. Bread was shared, figures were counted, losses measured, hopes reduced to wax tablets and bronze coins. Like countless merchants across the empire, he lived between two worlds, the vast machinery of Rome and the fragile household that depended on whether tomorrow's cargo arrived safely. Even in the stillness of night, Rome never truly loosened its grip. Long after the harbor fires dimmed, Lucius remained awake, bent over wax tablets, tracing the thin line between survival and ruin. A merchant's burden did not end when the cargo was stored. Debt endured, promises endured, and the memory of loss endured most of all. Yet dawn always returned, indifferent to exhaustion, and with it came the same labor that had built the empire. New seals, fresh rope, repaired jars, new bargains struck under old porticos. In the guild courtyards and river markets of Ostia, merchants met again beneath the eyes of sailors, scribes, and brokers, each man carrying yesterday's failures into today's negotiations. Lucius understood what Rome demanded of him. Not heroism, but endurance. Not triumph, but constancy. To trade in the shadow of the empire was to begin again before the wounds of the last day had closed, and to step back into the noise knowing that hesitation could be fatal, and routine itself was a test of will. By midday, the harbor had become a world unto itself, a republic of motion where every rope, weight, ledger, and shouted order served the appetite of Rome. Lucius moved through it with the hard calm of a man who understood that commerce was not merely exchange, but judgment. Oil had to be tested, debts renegotiated, cargo repaired, labor paid, and every decision carried the weight of consequence. Around him stood the true architecture of imperial power, not marble monuments, but working men, scarred foremen, river haulers, bankers, mule drivers, sailors and merchants whose names history rarely kept. They were the unseen machinery beneath Rome's grandeur, and in rare moments of stillness, when Lucius paused beside the water and watched the barges drift toward the capital, the scale of that machinery became clear. This was how the empire endured, not only through legions and emperors, but through the daily discipline of supply, risk, and recovery. In that sense, the merchant, too, was a servant of Rome, carrying the empire one shipment at a time. As evening settled over Ostia, the harbor changed its face, but never lost its rhythm. The shouting softened, torches replaced the sun, and the great machinery of trade passed from strain into endurance. For Lucius, these quiet hours were no less important than the chaos of the day. Wages had to be paid, loyalties maintained, and accounts remembered. because Roman commerce was built as much on trust as on cargo. In the taverns and courtyards near the quay, sailors, mule drivers, and dock foremen shared bread, watered wine, and the silence of men too tired to boast. Beyond them, the harbor rested under moonlight, its masts swaying like a dark forest above the water. And when Lucius finally returned home, the vast empire narrowed once more to a lamp, a sleeping child, and the gentle presence of his wife. There, in the fragile peace of the household, the merchant's true purpose was laid bare. Everything risked at sea, every bargain struck at dawn, every loss endured in silence, was for this small circle of warmth against the endless demands of Rome. And so, with the sun rising once more above Ostia and Portus, Lucius stepped back into the current of a world that could never stand still. Around him, the port thundered to life again. Cranes groaned, barges pressed against the quays, mule carts rolled toward Rome, and the voices of laborers merged into the living sound of empire. The storm, the losses, the long night of reckoning had changed nothing and everything. Cargo still had to move, contracts still had to be honored, families still had to eat. That was the final truth of a Roman merchant's life. He was not remembered in triumphal arches, nor carved into marble like emperors and generals. Yet without men like him, Rome itself would have starved. In every jar of oil, every sack of grain, every shipment that survived the sea and reached the city, there was the labor of merchants who gambled their fortunes against weather, distance, and fate. Lucius vanished back into the crowd, just one man among many, and yet essential to the vast engine that kept the Roman world alive.